This October, the wrong station celebrates a decade of dread. You can read the show notes to discover terrible new ways to celebrate with us. Today's episode, Cut Me Down, is written by Jacob Duarte Spiel and performed by Anthony Botelho.
The war was over, the forces disbanded, free to go where they pleased. Nobility and officers rode their horses back along the road, and were back in the capital within a few days. The foot soldiers had no choice but to walk, a long journey home. Among them was a young soldier, Theogold. His commanding officers saw him as a common man, but a good man. During training, his hard work and honesty quickly gained attention. They were used to filthy conscripts who deserted at the first opportunity. Theogold acted as nobly as the royal family's paladin bodyguards, perhaps even as noble as the family itself. Theogold had been drafted by the Empire, but he would have chosen to join up on his own accord. He came seeking adventure and riches, and had found both, of a sort. The war began, as so many do, with murder. The old emperor had been killed in his sleep, age having finally caught up to him. He'd grown soft in the heart, and some say soft in the head. He read poetry and ignored his military advisors. Such is the way of certain emperors. The new emperor was not like that. He was clever, deadly. He knew when to strike. And strike he did. The old emperor's death was mourned by few. Most welcomed the age of expansion promised by their new ruler. He reminded them of the old emperor, when that emperor had been young. So, the new emperor and his generals set out on a long journey in search of a new land to conquer. Weeks of roaming the borders led them to a valley between two jagged mountain ranges. An ancient path, beaten down by centuries of feet and hooves, linked the many small villages nestled along the foothills. This was a fertile place, protected from the harshness of winter. As they traveled along the road, they passed trees heavy with fruits, and farms that yielded so much food there was even space for flowers. The men traveled inconspicuously, dressed as traders. They were accosted on every side by kindness and hospitality. Every night was spent in the home of another generous soul. Their camping gear became moldy from disuse. At the tip of the road, the emperor found the most populous village. He was welcomed with open arms. A local festival, now forgotten, was taking place. The emperor and his men relaxed and drank and nourished themselves with the sweet fruits of the land. As dawn rose, the emperor stood in the town square and looked down into the valley at all the little villages that had come before. In the morning light, they seemed to glitter. He saw the beauty of this place and understood its value. It would be an easy conquest, a new jewel in the emperor's crown. Preparations for war began. They were right, of course. The emperor was a man of war, his generals even more so. They saw the valley's weaknesses and exploited them. Their forces marched through, putting farmers to the sword and burning the fields. In mere weeks, they had wound their way along the road up to the very last village, like a spark devouring a fuse. The rank and file were pleased. The spoils were great enough that every man could have a share. They reached the final village at the top of the path. the Emperor walked through the front gate and took the mare's head with his very own steel. And that was that. Theogold had fought alongside the other soldiers. He'd enjoyed the military up to that point, the training, the travel, and the camaraderie. However, war itself was distasteful. The stench of raised fields did not appeal to him. He would have rather been at home in his village. There was a beautiful girl there, Mirabelle. He often thought of her, and she was the reason for wanting to return safely. So, even though he disliked his soldierly duties, he fulfilled them to the best of his abilities. He took prizes to make the work more enjoyable. His pack was heavy with bounty, beautiful objects that would fetch a high price in the markets, an intricately carved dowry chest, a child's mirror inlaid with chips of ivory, a temple sculpture made of jade, an intricately patterned silk robe with only a little blood on it. Even if the robe was ruined, the fine silk would make a perfect engagement gift for Mirabelle. Theogold walked alongside a group of other men. They were all going in the same direction, their homes in neighboring regions. Theogold's village was just outside the capital and safely under the Emperor's protection. It was the beginning of summer now, and the river that ran through the town square would be filled with trout, fattened on mayfly larvae. Theogold smiled at the thought, having spent weeks eating only heavily smoked meat rations and increasingly stale bread. As they walked through the empty, silent villages of the valley, they spoke of where and what they were returning to. One of them spoke of the apricots that would be ripening in the sun by the time he returned. They were warm in your hands, the juice thick and sweet as syrup. Another spoke of cherries, both tart and sweet. They were orange-yolked duck eggs, loaves of warm, crusty bread, black rice made tangy with sweet vinegar. The men were enraptured. They moved from discussing flavors to discussing fragrances, the smell of wheat fields, the smell of honeysuckle, from fragrances to amazing sights, waterfalls, gorges, great flowering trees, from sights to experiences, the warm bed, the warm mug of tea, the soft, warm body of a lover. Each tried to outdo the others in describing the lushness and beauty of their home, until they all ached with longing. So focused they were that no one had noticed that the sun had set, or that the half-moon now lit their path, with a figure standing in their way. It was Theogold who put out his hand to stop the other men. His other hand went to the hilt of his sword as he said, "Who goes there?" The figure was a woman, thin and young. Her lank black hair trailed over her shoulders and down her back. It was so dark that it seemed to bleed into the night, and Theogold could not tell where one ended and the other began. She turned to them, and the men saw the bloodstains and filth on her silk robe. They saw the imprint of a horseshoe on her cheek and forehead, and the bald patches where her hair had been torn away. They saw her milky white eyes and sallow skin and blue lips. They saw that she was dead. Without another word, two of the men ran blindly off the road and into the dark. Their receding footsteps faded into silence. Theogold's sword hand tensed, and into that silence he asked again, "Who goes there?" And the ghost woman replied, "Please, cut me down." Theogold turned to the other two men. They looked back at him uneasily, unsure of what to do or what the ghost was asking of them. "You are already dead," said Theogold. "You may go into the afterlife, sister." The ghost woman's vacant eyes seemed to focus on Theogold. "I cannot," she said, and turned around to reveal the reason why. The back of her robe was punctured with a slash mark and a stab wound. Theogold stepped back. One of the two men with him took the opportunity to slip away, joining the others somewhere in the dark. It was clear. The woman had been killed from behind while running away. Theogold knew as well as anyone that such a death came with a powerful curse. The body could not leave this realm while a murder so dishonest hung over it. But Theogold was a common soldier, not a witch woman. He only knew soldiering, and he was a novice even at that. He didn't know what kind of intricate magic could release the ghost woman to the afterlife. "Cut me down," said the woman again. And Theogold understood what she was asking. It was no taunt, no trick. The ghost woman needed to die a second time at the hands of a noble soldier. A single swing of a sword, face to face, clean, honorable. He stepped forward and held his sword out, showing the ghost woman the keen blade, the fine hilt. A noble sword, if there had ever been one. And with a single slash, he cut the spirit diagonally from shoulder to hip. It was as if the blade passed through air. Her form did not even waver. The woman's eyes looked past him, beyond him. "Cut me down," she said to no one. Theogold's final companion looked at him askance, and then walked off the road into the night. Theogold watched him go, equally as disgusted with the men as he was proud of himself for not fleeing. A noble soldier, a truly noble soldier, does not run in the face of death. Theogold raised his sword for a second time. He would break the curse on her soul, for that is what it means to be honorable. The hours passed in sword strokes and sweat. Theogold thought back to his training, remembered how he had been taught to hold his blade, how to face an opponent with respect and dignity. He cut through the air again and again, each passing of the blade leaving no mark. His arms shook from exhaustion. His shoulders were on fire. His head pounded. All the while, the ghost woman stood and looked off into the distance, past him, beyond him. And as the gray pre-dawn crept up along the mountains, he decided to take a break. The light revealed what the night had hidden. Theogold was in the midst of one of the villages the Emperor's army had passed through. It had once been a place where people lived. Now all around him the cottages were charcoal. Bloated corpses lay in the muck, covered in flies and beetles. Crows slept in the nearby trees, waiting for the sun to rise so they could feed. All that remained were a few fields of squash and carrots. They ripened in the soil, unaware of what lay around them. Theogold looked back to the woman. He walked around her, investigating, considering what he could try to help her move on. It was bright enough now that he could see the intricate patterns in the ghost woman's robe. It was familiar. Then, a rush of recognition. He opened his bag. The silk robe he'd taken as bounty. Its pattern was identical. He turned it over in his hands and found where the material had been slashed across the back, where it had been punctured. The dried blood. And suddenly he remembered the fires, the children screaming, the men and women running from their homes. He remembered himself, saw himself through the ghost woman's unseeing eyes. A madman, a demon, swinging a sword, chasing her down the hallway, and then... she was his ghost. There were other choices for Theogold. He could have abandoned the ghost, like his compatriots. He could have quit the Emperor's service. He could have returned to his village and to Mirabel. Instead, on that very road, He turned his blade on himself. The sword point traveled neatly through his belly and out through his back. Theogold coughed, and blood spurted out both ends of a stab wound, coating the blade entirely. The ghost woman blinked. She seemed to be shaken from her trance. Silently, the ghost woman approached Theogold from behind. She laid her body against his back, and, as Theogold drove the sword to the hilt, the blade passed through her as well. Her eyes turned upward. A faint look of relief came over her features. And then she wasn't there anymore. The only figure on the road was Theogold, curled around his own sword, dead. The Emperor's men returned with a retinue of farmers and carpenters, but they never settled there. They instead reported seeing a fierce warrior spirit that warned them against ever entering the valley. He stood astride the road, 12 feet tall, carrying a sword from which dripped a never-ending stream of blood. So fearsome he was that the men fled back to the capital, where the prudent emperor had them executed for cowardice. Yet, still, the emperor decided not to send more men. That summer, all across the valley, the fruit trees blossomed and became heavy with cherries and pears. The fields were rampant with squash, beans, and wheat. The grass grew so high and thick that the wreckage of the towns was hidden. Then, with no one to harvest, the fruits fell and rotted on the ground. The fields became fetid with mold and maggots. The grass turned yellow, brown, and black as it died, untouched. By November, all that was left were the bodies. And past the valley, over the hills, and across the land, there was a river that ran through a town square. Just like every year, it was filled with fattened trout. But now, there was one less mouth to eat them. The Wrong Station is made possible with the generous support of our listeners on Patreon. Join us today at patreon.com/The Wrong Station for bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes content, ad-free listening, and additional goodies celebrating our decade of dread. The Wrong Station is co-produced by Alexander Saxton, Anthony Botelho, and Jacob Duarte Spiel, with music composed and performed by Alon Citrin, and arranged for the viola and performed by Viola Schmidt. You can follow us on social media at The Wrong Station, or email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.